Welcome to the Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad. Hey everyone, welcome to the Expat Edge. In this video, we want to discuss the difficulties of working remotely if your employer is in a different country. Now, after COVID, a lot of people are looking for remote work. They're analyzing their priorities and work-life balance. So people want to become digital nomads or remote workers. And many people are going to their employers and saying, can I work remotely? There are some things that we want to point out in this video that may help you understand their response, if it's a negative response, and maybe things that you haven't considered. The first one I can think of is time zone. It may be very difficult to, work if you're, for example, your employer's in the US and you're in Europe. It could be very difficult depending on your responsibilities, team meetings, calling clients if you're in sales or something like that. Because you're up at night, you basically have to restructure your whole day for your day job. And so now it's not a day job, it's a night job. So
although I would say though, if you are ahead of your team in time zone, it's significantly easier than if you're behind. In my day job, I work for a European company, but I'm in the US. So by the time I wake up, most people are, ending their day, so I kind of sometimes end up keeping them up or keeping them after for meetings. Whereas if it's the other way, it's almost impossible. I mean, if it's the other way where you are in front of them, you can always stay up later. But I mean, waking up at 3 a.m. to start a job is not really ideal, right? So if you're in the US and your company's in Asia, I mean, it just doesn't work. There's no time zone overlap unless you're working the night shift. So I just want to mention.
Yeah, I've been in that situation where, running Let's Russia from Germany, it's difficult sometimes because I have to stay up later. If something happens that we need to take care of something urgently, I have to stay up and work it out. So that's definitely something that I would warn people about. If it's okay for me, for example, because I don't mind staying up late, but if you're an early bird and staying up late, then it's going to wear you down over time.
Right.
So yeah, I can say that from experience. If you don't want to be, sometimes I'm just about to go to bed. I get a call 12:30, 1 a.m. and our clients and customers are like, where are you at? Oh, I'm in Germany. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm calling you. They understand. But I will tell people on the phone, for example, hey, I'm in our German location. Just so you know, if I don't answer, I'm, due to the time difference.
Right.
So I don't know. You have to juggle that. What's one of the other ones that first come to mind about the difficulties of remote work?
For me, lots of people come asking, or usually they'll say, I want to work remote. I'm allowed to work remote in the US, but my employer is strictly against me working outside the US. And lots of people don't necessarily understand. And to be honest, the HR people really have no clue and are unable to really explain what the problem with that is. In my experience anyway. If you are a US citizen, you work for a US company in the US remotely, and you want to move to, let's say, Bulgaria. Well, unfortunately, there's tons of potential legal consequences for the company if they let you do that. Number one is you can't work, even if it's not with a local company, you technically cannot work full time in any country, even if it's remote, technically. Now, the risk for you as an individual, obviously getting caught working remotely in any country is very low. But if it were to happen, there would be huge ramifications for the company that you work for. It would also potentially be a violation of US law, tax laws as well come into play. So a lot of the times when companies say, you can work remotely, but only in the US, they're not doing it because they don't want you or they think it's not going to work with, the team, whatever that you're in I don't know, Nicaragua even, in the same time zones. The problem is really just employment law. If you are an employee, your employer has lots more rules and regulations they have to follow. Now, if you're a freelancer, and again, none of this is legal advice. I'm just kind of giving the basic overview here. But if you're a freelancer or a contractor, there's much more flexibility. In that case, it's actually kind of your customer. You're performing a service to the customer rather than being an employee.
Right.
And this is a completely different legal relationship. So there's quite a bit more flexibility. So if you are a contract worker who's working remotely, you have quite a bit more flexibility. Although, we were kind of talking about this. I know quite a few people who are working remotely. Their job thinks that they're in the U.S., but they're actually, outside the U.S. That's not it's not a huge liability for the employee. Yeah. But if the company were to find out, it's probably something you would get fired for. So just know that. And it's not because, again, that they're so much against you living in this other place. It's that they technically have to get you a work visa if you're working for them in that country physically. This is something that a lot of people don't really, understand or grasp. But again, the HR teams usually do a pretty poor job of explaining. They just say it's against company policy to do that. But really, it's against the law in the country where you're going to be.
Right. So the issue with that I can foresee is that you are, imagine you're living abroad, your employer thinks you're in the same country, and if you slip up, if you, I don't know, if you're on a different time zone and it's dark where they are and it's light and they see a window, or I don't know, there's a lot of computer systems that are based on the time zone. You kind of have to be very careful and almost live a lie,
and I think
so
again,
you don't slip up.
The time zone issues. When you are, let's say living in Europe but working for a U.S. company, your work day doesn't start until 4 or 5 in the afternoon, depending on where you are in Europe. So you live your whole day. You wake up in the morning at 8 or 9, whatever. You have your whole day. And then, you start work. That's the second half of your day. And it's actually quite easy to kind of do that in the morning. But I did this last summer for about a month. I worked remotely from Europe, and it was really hard. When your workday goes till 1 a.m., it's a tough challenge to kind of push through that every single day. So that's just kind of a heads up. But again, just be aware that there are legal risks. And the other thing that we I think wanted to touch on was potential.
I have a question about that topic. So would it be a smart move then to, for the employer and the employee to agree to break that relationship and become a contractor? So for example, let's say the company is not your employer anymore, it's your client, and you just bill them according to the contract, contract work, or, I don't know, by project or something like that.
You make a great point. You can't actually just, if you're an employee and you don't have, like certain projects that you're working on that can be defined in a contract, you can't just say, okay, tomorrow, we signed a new contract. He was an employee that we, expected to work 40 hours a week. He gets vacation time, this, that, and the other. Now he's a contractor, and we've signed the contract. Like, that actually doesn't work. Like, to be considered a contractor, you need a contract. Number one. Number two, you will get no benefits, so they can't. I mean, they could theoretically pay you extra for these things, but no vacation time. They can't tell you when to be online. You have to have certain projects that they're hiring you for. So, a lot of companies. With good employees, they don't want to do that, because then that obviously they lose complete control of the employee. They become really a kind of free agent, and they also can't stop you in any way from working other jobs and showing up anywhere for anything. So if you can convince your employer to do that, then yeah, of course, I think it's great, because usually when you're living abroad, you get great healthcare and other things that are either free or very cheap. You don't necessarily need the subsidies from the companies in the U.S. like you do if you live in the U.S. So it's not necessarily simple to do that, but it is definitely possible. But one thing that people don't think about when you do this, I mean, technically, if you're an American, you work for a U.S. company, and you go and you live in let's use Croatia for example. You have, and you're working for a U.S. company, but based in Croatia, you actually become a tax resident after a certain period of time in Croatia. So you are technically obligated to pay Croatian income tax. Now, depending on what tax treaties are in place and whatnot, and you can't write.
So that's difficulty number 3 that we're shifting into, right? The tax implications.
Right. And so that is the third thing we wanted to talk about, was the potential tax implications. But one more thing before we move to that. If you're a contractor, I guess it works with it's part of tax implications, but if you are a contractor, it's your obligation to be in compliance with taxes everywhere that's required. Now, the employer absolves himself completely. They'll pay you a lump sum every month for whatever the services you provided were, and then you have to comply with all the tax regulations.
I've also heard that employers will, have you sign a form saying, yes, I understand that the company is not responsible. I'm responsible for my taxes and things like that. So the company kind of wants to distance themselves from that responsibility.
I mean, by law, they have no obligation, to help you if you're a contractor, but they do that just to cover their own backs if some dispute pops up. But again, the tax implications if you're a contractor can be massive and very expensive to ensure you're in compliance. Unfortunately, especially if you're an American, right? Because if you're an American living in Spain and you're a contractor for a U.S. company, it's practically impossible without setting up some sort of legal entity to get around paying U.S. FICA tax, for example, 15%.
Right. Yeah,
it's almost impossible.
Well, the issue that I've run into, and I've seen a lot of expats run into this, is that when they go to prepare their taxes, they don't do it necessarily themselves, right? They'll seek out somebody to help them. And I personally have had a heck of a time trying to find a person who has experience in both jurisdictions.
It's almost impossible
with the
to
US.
Find. This is the problem.
Yeah. So with US tax and Germany, or even though they have tax treaties, right? It's manageable, I think, in most cases. But if you have a very complex
let's take
the
simplest example. Let's take the simplest example. You're an American. You are a contractor. You just have one client. They pay you $10,000 a month, and you live in, let's just say Germany. It's going to get complicated very, very fast. First, you have to file a U.S. tax return, regardless of whether you owe money, because you're a U.S. citizen. So you've got to figure that out. You're going to have to pay FICA tax because you're just acting as like a sole entrepreneur. Again, there's ways you can get around it. I'm not an expert. You should contact experts if you need it. But then in Germany, let's say you don't speak German. How easy is it to file a tax return to pay taxes on income you made from the U.S. and Germany? Is it straightforward? You just fill out a piece of paper or use an electronic program and it's done?
Well, let's take Germany is not a good example because they do have resources in English actually. So it could be done.
I bet the amount is very big, right? You're going to pay probably 40% taxes if you make $10,000 a month.
It depends on your situation. If you have family and where you live in Germany, yeah. But for the most part, I think if you're split into two countries, then you're going to have a heck of a time really getting down to, okay, how much do I owe here? How much do I owe here? What are the exemptions? And yes, there's a tax treaty, but you're not going to want to even deal with that. So when you go to talk to a CPA, the CPA will only know the US side and not the German side. So you have to pretty much employ two experts.
But that doesn't even work because there are certain taxes you don't have to pay in one of the other countries if you paid them in the other. So
you may overlap and overpay. Yeah.
And so what you really need, and look, this is literally the simplest example. And most people who are, doing this type of thing are not in compliance with one of the countries. Again, what is the risk?
Right.
I don't know. It's probably quite low. But again, if you live in Germany, for example, and then you want to apply for a permanent residence permit later on, they're probably going to ask you, can you show us your tax documents for the past few years? If you're like, oh, I didn't file it, I didn't make any money. And then I'll be like, well, that seems kind of strange. How did you not make any money? And then you get into this.
How do you have a residence permit then?
So all this is to say is just that there are lots of complexities to tax. And obviously, if you want to minimize your taxes in both countries, you're going to have to set up a legal entity in one of them, or even a third country. And we were talking about if we incorporate a company in Dubai, then we can manage it from Europe and the US, and
right.
Now you have 3 jurisdictions to deal with, and you need somebody who knows Dubai law, European Union law, and the US. And so it just gets very complicated very fast. And this is why companies, it's easier for them just to say, you can't work in another country. Because if you're technically an employee, then they have to figure out how to ensure that you are in compliance in a country where they probably have no office, right? So then their legal team has to find some lawyer in Bulgaria where you live to try to figure out, how do we make this guy in compliance? And what they'll say is, well, you have to set up an entity. And then they say, whoa, we don't want that. Because then, we'll end up having to pay Bulgarian tax and we don't do anything.
We're not even doing business there.
Right. So unfortunately, this is the reality. But I mean, there are ways around it. And maybe we should invite some experts on to talk about some of those ways. I know a lot of, like Nomad Capitalists, he's talking about all this stuff, and he gets, very high level, but there are quite a few details that he leaves out. He does these videos, pay 0 tax in Malaysia, but I mean, you've got to have enough to pay some accountant $50,000 to set up the right legal entities, and so it's not that simple.
Right. Well, I think for the majority of people, this is not tax advice, is not legal advice. It's just an overview of 3 issues that we have experienced, and many other digital nomads, expats, freelancers. They'll approach their employer, and their employee will just say, nope, we're not going to do it because it's so complicated. So those were the 3 difficulties that we thought of: time zone, legality, whether your employer will even agree to you going abroad or not. And then the third one is tax implications, how to, go around basically being complete compliance in multiple countries. And it's a lot even on the surface. So if you have any comments or questions about these topics, leave them in the comments, and we'll see you in another video.
This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.